of the questions I've become interested in is, okay, if you're an obese individual, you have more fat. But my understanding is oftentimes the fat tissue becomes more inflammatory over time. To what extent is that true? Is the fat tissue in obesity actually inflammatory? And what can you tell us about like the nature of that inflammation? Where is it coming from? Why would fat tissue be inflammatory?
Great questions. Yes. So in the context of obesity, there is an inflammatory process that occurs in the adipose tissue. It's thought that the inciting incident are dying adipocytes. There are some adipocytes that become so large that they undergo a cell death pathway that is caspase dependent. And that leads to the release of all of the adipocytes cargo components into the interstitial space, including a huge amount of lipids. Many of those lipids are pro-inflammatory themselves. And what happens is macrophages get recruited into the adipose tissue to basically wall off this dying adipocyte and engulf all of that material. And it looks like a crown sitting on a head. So it's been termed the crown-like structure. These macrophages start to induce expression of many different pro-inflammatory cytokines, and it leads to a vicious cycle where there's the initiation of an inflammatory response to clear out these adipocytes, potentiates more inflammation, and it just keeps going. And there are a number of studies that have shown over the last 30 years that the degree of inflammation in the adipose tissue is closely related to the risk of developing metabolic complications like type 2 diabetes.
Interesting. And so are there any indications that for obesity or other things, but just metabolic dysfunction in general, that either within an individual you can transfer healthy mitochondria from other cells into metabolically dysfunctional cells, or even in between individuals in a more therapeutic setting, you could do the same thing and reverse things like obesity or diabetes or conditions like this?
Yeah, there have been actually 4 studies that have been published doing mitochondria transplants in the context of obesity. None of them come from my lab, but they do support this notion that if you do mitochondria transplants, that does decrease the severity of obesity and it reduces the degree of inflammation in the adipose tissue.
So basically, you're taking mitochondria from a non-obese individual, injecting it into an obese individual. The mitochondria then get to cells somewhere, probably multiple places in the body, and the obesity phenotype goes down at least.
Right. And these are studies that have been done in rodents, not humans.
Right. And do we know more detail there? Like where exactly are they going? Which cell types really matter for that and all of that?
No, we don't know that actually yet. It's actually proven to be quite difficult to track the mitochondria since they've been transplanted.
Yeah.
We've done this type of work in the context of an inherited mitochondrial disease called Lee syndrome. And we have basically used molecular approaches using mitochondria that come from a strain of mice that has a different mtDNA genome that we can detect using PCR. And when we do the mitochondria transplants in those mice, actually the compartments that seem to retain the most mitochondria that we've transplanted are actually enriched in the immune system. So bone marrow, blood, spleen, peritoneal cavity. So it looks to us like maybe the immune system is preferentially taking up these mitochondria, but it's not so clear because the signal detection is dependent on the mitochondrial biomass of the acceptor cells. And immune cells tend to have the fewest mitochondria compared to things like the hepatocytes and cardiomyocytes. So it could just be a limited detection problem.